When I first joined the 52nd Combat Engineers at Durham, North Carolina, the second day I was there, after 6 o'clock roll call, they had 100 of us stay over, and they said, "We have a special mission for you." So they marched us down to an empty hall, and we went into the hall, and there was a captain stood on a table, and he says, "You men have been selected to serve on a special mission for the U.S. Army." He says, "It's because you're needed, and we feel we've selected the right people for it because of your education and lifetime experience and your interest in government, and because you're with us today as part of the 52nd Engineers, we've selected you for this special mission for which you may not return, but you'll be doing something for your government that above and beyond what the ordinary soldier is called on to do." In the meantime, my head was beginning to swell, and just then there was a man came in the back door, and he says, "Captain, you've got the wrong list." And then my head deflated, and they marched us back to our barracks, and we found that we were just ordinary soldiers.
Good. Do you have another story, too, you'd like to share?
Well, the other story is a short one. When I was 3 years old, I lived out in the country in Pennsylvania, and our home was just above a national highway, Route 22, and I'd leave after breakfast in the morning in my kiddie car and go down the hill and sit there all day and watch the Army trucks go by from Detroit to New Jersey that they were going to ship to France. And my mother would call me at lunchtime, and I'd drag my kiddie car up the hill. After lunch, I'd go down the hill again and sit there till supper time and continue to watch these Army trucks. And so I felt I was part of the First World War as well as part of the Second World War.
That's good. Do you have a story about anything that happened during battle that you'd like to share?
Yes. One time in Leyte in the Philippines, Japanese bombers came over about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and dropped bombs, and some of them went off immediately and some of them went off at 2-hour spacing. In the meantime, everybody was in his foxhole, and our tents were just filled with debris and holes. And I was sergeant of the guard that evening, and we went out to visit one of the guard stations, and the guards were in a hole, foxhole, and I stayed with them for a short while, and then we heard a stomping, something, and one of the fellows, you're subject to rumors all the time in the Army. One of the fellows said, "It's a Japanese troop coming up through the weeds." And I waited a little while, and this tromping got heavier and heavier. And finally, the soldier beside me picked up his gun and aimed it, and he shot it. And then we heard a terrible moan, the worst moan I've ever heard in my life. But it was dark, and we figured that he had shot something. and we really didn't know what it was. The next morning we went out and saw he shot a bull right between the eyes. And because of that experience, it remained in my memory. And anytime I'm filled with grief due to a loss of a parent or anybody, that moan comes back to me. And when my wife died 28 years ago, we were sitting at the hospital right after she died, and this moan appeared. And I asked my daughter, I says, where did that come from? Well, she says, it came from you. The same moan that we had heard that, 30, 40 years before. That was at Hellandia in New Guinea that occurred. And so certain experiences that you have stay with you all your life. And even though you don't recognize them, somebody else has to tell you, as my daughter did, that the moan came from me. It's one of the things that can happen to any soldier. And I can think of one other occasion when in the Philippines, when the Japanese dropped paratroopers on us, and it was at night, or just at dusk, and every searchlight on the island was practically centered on those paratroopers, and very few of them got down alive, if any. But then we heard motors running, and one of the people said, "Well, it's Japanese tanks coming." So the captain and I crawled on our bellies and got up to where these trucks were. The motors were running, but there were no soldiers there. They had taken off when they saw these paratroopers come. And so then our job was to shut off all the motors, then crawl back to the guard station and tell the men, well, it wasn't Japanese tanks, it was just men hauling gravel out of a gravel pit in army trucks. And when the paratroopers dropped, well, they decided to take off and left the motors running. So it's that was an occasion that I'll never forget either. It's but my men were very faithful. I was a staff sergeant and the master sergeant. I had 40 men under me, and we I would assign the men to various projects and the right equipment, and check them out each day. And when they would run across any difficult situation, they'd come to me. And my captain told me, he says, Appel, says, you take care of this thing. You have the whole responsibility. He said, don't bother me unless it's something really, really serious. And so I was able to take care of it. But in assigning men to various projects, some of them would go on sick call right before you never to go out, and then have to have other men lined up immediately to take their place. And that often occurred late in the evening, and I remember sitting on my cot with a flashlight and with all these names and the various projects, And I'd have to be reassigning people into the night, practically, for people that couldn't go to the job they were supposed to go to. We were building roads and building bridges. We built 2 or 3 general hospitals. And so our work was cut out for us in a manner that generally a foot soldier doesn't ever run across, but a person in the Corps of Engineers had that to face every day. And sometimes when we were marching ahead, our equipment would break down, and some officer would say, "Well, get rid of that." And we'd go ahead, and we lost more pieces of good equipment in big mud holes in New Guinea and in the Philippines. But when in a war, money doesn't mean anything. You just ask for more equipment. When something breaks down, you just ask for more equipment. And after the war wound up in France and Germany, we started getting more equipment in the Philippines. And so at the end of the war, I had all the bulldozers I wanted. I had cranes and shovels and rollers and equipment to break down stone. We would break gravel down to the right size and place it on the roads we had built. And it was a big advantage for us to have all that equipment. And the war was, when the war was ending, our men got restless, and a lot of them just played cards or gambled. And it was a matter of trying to keep them from getting too discouraged, waiting to go home. Because every time the ship would leave the harbor, why, they thought, well, you know, they should be on it. But our time hadn't come to leave. So I used to have the fellows dress in their uniforms, and I'd march them for a couple miles and to take up the show them there was something else to do besides gamble and play cards. So that made me look like the good guy.